Instructional Improvement Committee. Roll call.
Ms. Beebe. Ms. Beebe is present. Mr. Bennett.
Here.
Mr. Bennett is present. Ms. Bophy. Ms. Bophy is absent. Ms. Bradford.
Here.
Ms. Bradford is present. Ms. Destug. Ms. Destug is absent. Mr. Garvey.
Here.
Mr. Garvey is present. Mr. Gio.
Present.
Mr. Gio is present. Ms. Hill. Ms. Hill is absent. Mr. Lee.
Here.
Mr. Lee is present. Ms. Jones. Orange Jones, sorry.
Present.
And Mr. Romer. Mr. Romer is present. And Mr. Nakhan.
Present.
Mr. Nakhan is present. You have a quorum.
First item.
Your consent agenda is ready for approval, adding items 3.1, 5.1, 5.2, 6.1, and 7.3, noting that 7.3 is a notice of intent.
Do you have a motion for approval?
So moved. Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Any opposition? Motion approved. Next item.
The next item on your agenda is item 4.1, page 16, consideration of a request for applications process for Louisiana Course Choice Program. The department recommendation is to approve.
We have a motion on the floor. We need a motion on the floor for this item.
So, move to support the department's recommendation.
Move for approval. Any
Second.
second? Thank you, Mr. Gio. Any questions?
Madam Chairman, if I might just make a couple of comments.
Absolutely.
Thank you. This is a new bulletin that will effectively start and manage what is called the course choice process. This comes out of the Act 2 legislation that was passed in this most recent legislative session. And while it wasn't as talked about as some of the other aspects of Act 2, what it essentially allows is for funding to flow out of the formula so that families and students can choose to take courses that may not be provided by the school that the child or the student attends. Such courses are going to come primarily from one of four providers: institutions of higher education, industry and actual corporations themselves, 3 from online providers, and 4 from teachers or other educators themselves. They will develop such courses in response to the request for application, no different from a charter school in that respect. They'll then apply to BESE, but there will be an outside group, as there are with charters, that essentially review and either endorse or don't endorse the proposal previous to the department's recommendation to BESE. BESE would then authorize the course, and the course will be like any other course. It will have a assessment, it will have a scope and sequence, it will have a way of assessing whether or not the course was successful, and those ways will accord with standards that exist in any one of these courses. I think what you will see in response to this is something that is unique across the country. There are elements of this that already exist, like dual enrollment, for example, in higher education. This will expand access to dual enrollment. But I think probably more important, it will yield, new providers of educational services, such as corporations actually doing workplace-based training for students who otherwise wouldn't have access to our K-12 system to grant credits. It will yield an openness to advanced placement and other rigorous coursework that too often doesn't exist in other places. And perhaps most important, it will give teachers a way themselves of developing courses as entrepreneurs and essentially marketing those courses statewide. And we've already talked with a number of teachers about their interest in this. This is under the leadership of several department staff who have done really an amazing job getting this up and running so quick since the legislative session. Ken Bradford, Dave Lefkowith, and Debbie Shum's team has been assisting deeply. So we recommend it for your consideration and are available to answer whatever questions.
Ms. Bophy?
I'd just like to add how excited I am about the opportunities that this is creating for students, and also the opportunities that it's going to create for our educators to be involved in education in different ways. Now that we have the technology to reach students in new and different ways, and that you do not have to be face-to-face in order to instruct kids, will give kids an opportunity to be taught by some of our most effective educators this way, and also give educators a different approach to teaching. So I'm thinking about how oftentimes to be a teacher, you're so limited in structure. You have to have a full-time schedule based on the school schedule. This would definitely allow our teachers who might want to work part-time virtually to be able to do so. This is just an incredible opportunity, and I hope that a lot of people pick up on it and that it is one of these options that our students take into consideration.
Any other comments? Mr. Lee?
My question is, how's it going to be financed?
Well, I think one of the things that we've heard from teachers or from corporate entities or what have you is that it's essentially hard to provide these kinds of services to schools because there isn't funding, and it's always supplemental. The MFP attaches funding to these courses at a maximum of 1/6 the appointed MFP for, 1/6 of 90% of the appointed MFP for that semester or year. However, that's a maximum, and as with scholarships, the tuition can be lower than the 1/6 of 90% of the MFP as well. And providers have an incentive to make it lower because we will assume that the parents will be looking for courses that are priced at a lower price point, in part because that might allow you to take more of such courses.
Any other questions or comments?
Just one second. I think what Ms. Brophy said earlier, I think this is...
I'm sorry, Mr. Lee, you weren't finished. I apologize. Mr. Lee?
I'd like to react to his comment. I'm not concerned with that. I'm not opposed to this. I think the concept is good, the idea is good, but I see it putting another burden on local school systems because they're using that MFP money to employ teachers and to employ other personnel. You know, about more than 85% of the money goes for pay. And then local school systems have all other kinds of other expenses. I just see this as another cost to local school systems. And it's just to say they can use 1/6 of the MFP money. That is, you know, local school systems have budgets they have to operate on. And they don't have any way to budget for that.
Well, I don't disagree that if I were running a local school system, I'm not saying I would be happy about not having as much revenue. At the same time, frankly, local school districts are increasing the amount that they are using to purchase online services, to purchase dual enrollment, which they pay for already. You know, it's all one and the same. I mean, it's simply basically paying tuition for a kid to attend school somewhere else.
Ms. Orange-Jones, and then
Simply just to follow up with what was said earlier, I just think this could be immensely promising. I just wanted to commend the department for its work. A question about the way the course, anything would be advertised. Is that primarily through the website of the DOE? Is that how we're thinking about how the actual programs would reach the public?
Well, I think we have an initial stage, which is to work with universities. We hope that our dual enrollment providers will come through this process to work with online providers, industry-based providers, and to market to them this opportunity. But then, you're right, subsequent to that, we need to work directly with schools, guidance counselors, and family members. And that's really the most critical thing of all. We're going to have essentially an online portal through which counselors or families will have access. They will be able to log on, they'll be able to see what courses they're eligible for and to enroll from there. And we're going to do, I believe we're starting meetings across the state already to actually meet with potential providers, to meet with parents, and we'll be doing a kind of grassroots campaign across the state to get the word out to parents about the options that are available to them.
That's great. And just to follow up, do you have any initial sense of what kind of supply already exists? Like just what kind of interest there is on the potential supply side based on initial focus groups you've done? Or
we've been meeting with corporate entities, we've been meeting with universities, we've been meeting with online providers, and we've been meeting with teachers. I think there's going to be varying levels of interest one way or the other. I think that the online providers will get into the space very quickly, as they already are in the districts. Two, I think the universities, when we're meeting with them, it will take some adjustment because they're already, selling their services to districts already, and we'll be basically saying, let's have a unified process. The teachers, I think, will be the most challenging to market to, and the corporate entities are showing a lot of early support, but they want some sense of, so what's the process? How does this actually going to work? So I think it varies depending on the group, but we're having different conversations, and there's a lot of interest so far.
And I'd like to add that one of the things that will be available. Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. Garvey, do you
defer.
yield? Ms. Betty?
One of the things that will be available is that as students pick courses or enroll in courses, is that online the students will be able to track whether or not that'll help them in earning their diploma, and also make sure that they meet all the requirements that exist for TOPS. So since there are various requirements that students have to meet.
Mr. Garvey?
Yeah, question for Superintendent. Have you given any thought to what kind of a timeline there will be for registration, with the thought being that, as Mr. Lee was talking about, the local school system probably will need to know ahead of time, somewhat ahead of time, how many teachers they're going to need for that coming school year. So the more lead time we can give them regarding how many students are signing up for these courses, the better they'll be able to plan. And I don't know the answer, because the more lead time you give them, the less flexibility you give to the students, and you're cutting off some students that are, late minute deciders. But have y'all thought about that?
We want to be as flexible as possible, and so we're on a timeline to basically publish the course catalog January 1 of 2013, which is well before high school students enroll, for that fall semester in terms of what courses they're going to take. And we would, in doing that, allow counselors to actually speak with students, no different from how they already do it, about what courses they're going to take next year. We would hope, because the law would allow for counselors not to discourage students from taking courses, but at the same time, we're not trying to work around the guidance counselors. We think you have to work with the guidance counselors on this as well. So point being, whenever the counselors enroll students, they will already know or will be able to work through with students selecting these courses.
So y'all are not thinking about setting up a cutoff date several weeks ahead of the start of school, after which time students can enroll?
I'm sorry. There will be a cutoff date in the enrollment process. Ken, I don't remember what the cutoff date is that we've planned.
We're building the RFA for a course management / registration system. We're going through the state procurement process for that. We will release that. Following that, the course catalog will be published. We will populate that into the system where students can come in. Courses chosen will be able to be mapped back to diploma paths. And then we're scheduling right now for a mid-February to early March deployment of the system, where students, counselors, and parents will have access to the registration system.
When would the cutoff be, after which time a student cannot register?
Yeah, so the board is going to be able to determine what the course offerings of when the window of time that a course can be offered. We're looking at it running simultaneously on a calendar like we currently do with our state virtual school, which is courses would go live in the first or second week of August, depending on the provider. And then we would have a cutoff of July 1st where they could enroll, and that would give time for the system to get populated, get the information to the providers for students to take courses.
Thank you.
And this is just, today we're just approving the process, and so it will come back to us, is my understanding, when it's finalized.
That is correct. And what will happen is there will be an RFA crafted. We will solicit for providers. Providers will apply, and then after the process of being vetted, we'll bring back to the board, probably in December, a list of recommended course providers for the board to approve. And then each provider will identify how many courses they would like to offer in what areas, as the superintendent alluded to, whether it's college credit courses, CTE, business industry courses, teacher-led courses. We'll bring that back to the board for approval.
Thank you. Any other questions? I want to commend you all on the work, and on the backup data, it was very good and very easy to understand. Any opposition? If not, so approved. Next item.
Next item is item 5.3 on page 21. Consideration of the appointment of the director for Louisiana School for the Deaf. The recommendation is to approve.
We need a motion.
I so move.
Thank you, Mr. Gibb. We need a second.
I'll second.
Mr. Garvey, any questions?
I would just comment, board members, that Nancy Benham was a name that I first heard a couple of months back when this process was under consideration. I asked to meet with her, as obviously this is an extremely critical position for our state. And having met with her, having heard from Elizabeth Moore her credentials, and then having had her talk to me about her record, not just in education, but as really a leader in deaf education in multiple places across the country, some here in the South and then also in Pennsylvania. In other words, I was extremely impressed, and that's why we're bringing this recommendation to you today, to bring her on board as the leader of LSD.
Any comments or questions?
Is she here?
She's not here today.
I don't believe she's here.
Would you like to make a comment? Okay. Mr. Lee, anything else? Hearing no further discussion, all those opposed, motion passes. Next item.
Next item is 7.1 on page 30. Consideration of revisions to Bulletin 741, Louisiana Handbook for School Administrators, Section 2907, Connections Process. Department recommendation is to approve as a notice of intent.
We need a motion for this item.
Move it to approve as notice of intent.
Ms. Dasty, do you have a second? Ms. Hill, thank you. Any discussion or comments? Hearing none. Any opposition? Motion's approved. Next item.
Next item is 7.2 on page 32. Consideration of revisions to Bulletin 741, Louisiana Handbook for School Administrators, Section 2395, Distance Education. The department recommendation is to approve as notice of intent.
Do we have a motion to approve?
So move.
Thank you, Mr. Garvey. Do we have a second? Ms. Hill, thank you. Mr. Reimer?
On page 33, this is distance education. Is this specific to the Louisiana school, virtual school, or is it all virtual schools? Or is it, I'm just trying to clarify.
Mr. Bradford?
Ken Bradford, Louisiana Virtual School. This is a policy that's actually applicable to all LEAs that offer distance learning courses. Currently, what the policy states is that any student who takes an online course, there must be a Louisiana licensed teacher within the classroom while the student works on the course. And what this policy is recommending is that the individual whom is in the classroom is either a Louisiana licensed teacher or a paraprofessional. Just to clarify, the teacher of record in an online course is the actual teacher who is delivering the course online. So this is an individual that would come into the computer lab while the student is working on the course. They would monitor the students. They would work as a liaison. And what it's doing also is it's freeing up that licensed teacher in a school building so that they could be on other duties.
Other questions or comments? All those opposed? Motion carries. Next item.
Next item is item 7.4, page 37. Consideration of revisions to Bulletin 741, Louisiana Handbook for School Administrators, Section 2321, Carnegie Credit for middle school students. Department recommendation is to approve as notice of intent.
Do we have a motion on this item? Thank you, Mr. Reimer. Do a second. Thank you, Mr. Lee. Any questions or comments?
I'm just interested in the intent here.
Superintendent, would you like to speak to that?
In the intent?
Mm-hmm.
The intent is to essentially authorize new courses as eligible for Carnegie credit, and in particular to essentially make courses available for credit that have been that are unique to students who are visually impaired. These courses specifically are geared toward those students, and obviously Braille 1, Braille 2 would be particularly relevant for that population of students.
We're actually on the next item, Superintendent.
Oh, I'm
That
sorry.
was consent, I apologize.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That was a good explanation. That was a good explanation. I was looking for.
It was rock solid, I have to say.
Ms. Stephen, would you like to address this?
Oh, okay, sorry. So this is, essentially, this is for middle school students trying to get high school credit. The policy requires that the teacher be certified at the secondary level in the course that is taught, or that the student has passed a credit exam in that subject. And this is a proposal to delete that requirement related to the teacher certification. High school students are able to receive credit if the teacher is not secondary certified, and this just brings that into line with that requirement. We think the principal should be able to determine if the teacher is qualified, especially if the student has done well on the exam. And 8th grade students with secondary certified teachers can score below good and can still receive Carnegie credit. So we think there's basis for making this change.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Hearing none. Any opposition? Motion carries. Next item.
Next item is item 7.5 on page 39, consideration of revisions to Bulletin 111, Louisiana School District and State Accountability System, to reflect new policy as a result of the ESEA flexibility request that was approved for implementation by the United States Department of Education. Department recommendation is to approve as a notice of intent.
I need a motion on the item.
So moved.
Mr. Garvey, do I have a second?
A second.
Thank you, Ms. Orange Jones. Any questions or comments? Mr. Garvey?
Question.
I'm sorry.
Mr. Superintendent, why did you want to say something?
Mr. Garvey, if it's okay with you.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
You're so civil.
This feels like a Jane Austen novel. I wanted just to frame this. I recognize this is a large item and look forward to the discussion of it, especially having discussed it with as many of you as I have. I wanted just to say that there are really two, I think, critical objectives to what you have in front of you. The board essentially moved now, years ago almost, to adopt the Common Core standards. And while that is a shift in a certain respect to the GLEs and to the comprehensive curriculum, it is not at this level a shift in accountability until what you have in front of you has been accomplished. In essence, our current accountability system does not align with the expectations of the Common Core assessments that our students will have to achieve and our teachers will have to achieve in 2 years. So first and foremost, this proposal you have in front of you tries to achieve that. As we raise the standards, it's critical to note that this does not purport to drop schools' scores. Just to give you some examples, in Florida, most recently, the test itself was changed so that the bar for performance at a proficient level was increased. Well, that meant that the students proficient in their literacy exam went from roughly 80% to 23%, I think the number was. This is not an attempt to do that. In New York State, when I was deputy superintendent in New York City, they similarly redefined what it meant to be a high school graduate. And in doing that, all of a sudden our graduation rate dropped. This is not an attempt to do that. We have kept schools steady, and I'm happy to provide the numbers in conversation, because the weighting that we grant particular factors is designed to, in essence, reward schools for where they currently are. If you're a B in our current system, you should expect to be a B in this new system. But at the same time, it says we do need to realign our measures with the Common Core. And just to give you some indications of what that means. It means that in the elementary grades, we're not going to anymore be able to give credit for students who are approaching basic. Why? We should have no expectation on the Common Core assessments that students would get credit for approaching basic. At the high school level, we still have our end of course requirements, but we're proposing to assess students against the ACT. multiple reasons for that, but in part, the ACT is fully Common Core aligned. It aligns our system with the same expectations that this board approved when it approved the Common Core standards being applied to all students. Third, advanced placement is going to be the anchoring vision for excellence in this high school system. Why? Because the levels of advanced placement rigor that are required are indicative of excellence in college and excellence on the Common Core. So we're trying to make that alignment. But third, and this is the thing that I think probably goes most unsaid, Bulletin 111 in its current form is extremely cumbersome, is by no one's fault, has been layered over the years with various provisions that people with the best of intentions have put in. And in the end, it amasses to something that is, I think, very hard to understand. To Scott Norton's credit and Jennifer Craig's credit, and to Jessica Tucker, who has really done a lot of the work on this as well, they have not only tried to make a more ambitious Bulletin 111, but they've tried to really reduce the size of this bulletin so that there are provisions that, frankly, most people don't even know about that were kind of gumming up this bulletin that they have really tried to reduce. And I think we have effectively proposed a Bulletin 111 that is less than half of the size of the Bulletin 111 that would have preceded it. So my kudos to that team for doing that work. I know there's going to be a lot of discussion, look forward to having it, but wanted you to have that context, that we're raising our accountability system toward a bar that this board had already approved. Second, that we're trying to do it in a way that simplifies and clarifies this system. But third, we're not doing it so as to humiliate or drop schools' performance on their letter grades. In fact, on our system, schools should expect to be held steady or perhaps even do better for reasons of the growth element of this measure that I'm happy to describe for you. So thanks very much.
Thanks. And Jessica, I may just ask you to come to the table so that if there are questions, you will be available. And Mr. Garvey, I believe you had a question.
One question that I had is regarding the ACT test and the Explore test and the Plan test. Can you tell me a little bit about the difference between those three tests?
The ACT is a somewhat of a longer assessment, but it's fair to say that they tend to mirror one another in the movement up the scale. We're proposing to test Explore twice. We're proposing to test Plan once in the 10th grade, and then ACT on that in the 11th grade year. The tests align. They're graded somewhat on different scales, but each one of them has a band within which you can say if a student achieves that band, then they are effectively college ready. They each have reading, writing, and math components. There's a writing component on the final ACT that we are not going to be including, however, in this administration. So there is, they align quite well. Schools already use them statewide to inform their instruction and to inform how they expect students to do on the subsequent assessment. But we're not going to be using every component of the ultimate ACT.
Okay. And the follow-up question is how do these tests, as you mentioned, that are designed to test whether a child is prepared for college, how does it apply to a child that's wondering whether he's prepared for a career? Or really a child that's planning to go into the career track instead of college track, or if a school has an unusually large population of children that are going career track as opposed to college track, are they going to be harmed because the children are not shooting for college? Do these tests, discount that kind of a student?
Yeah, and we've certainly heard a lot about that. I think that it depends on what your definition of career track is. If you mean career diploma, would a student who is on the career diploma track do as well as a student who is not on the career diploma track? The answer is no. And why is that? Because a career diploma track student is not required, for example, to take courses beyond Algebra 1, which one has to take in order to do well on the math section of the ACT. However, I think any one of us would argue for our own children that even though we might want them to be successful in a career, the career diploma would probably not be the first option that we would choose for our child. And that if you score an 18 on the ACT, effectively you are eligible to go to college, but you are also eligible to go into the workplace, and that there are not, employers who are banging down the doors for people who cannot score at a level above remediation on the ACT. So what we would say is that what we would hope for our students is that they have a choice as to whether or not to pursue career or college. The course choice presentation that you just heard is very much of an attempt to get real apprentice-based career education in as many education programs as possible. At the same time, we don't think that a student who is headed to career by necessity can't do well on the ACT or shouldn't do well on the ACT. And we think that we need to rehinge our entire state's expectations that every child should be able to do a level that is better than remediation on the ACT. We respect the fact that students currently who are in high school who have been slotted for the career diploma may not do well. Given that that's not something that, in our speaking with people, that they would be overjoyed if their student could only achieve the career diploma, we think we should still hinge our expectations to a higher standard. We should hope that kids have a choice of career or college, and that we should realize that it is us as a school system, not some external phenomenon, that placed that student on the career diploma in the first place. We had that student for 9 or 11 years educated in our school system before they got placed on the career diploma, and thus we think this is a reasonable expectation.
Well, a related question is, if a child is not planning to go to college but is planning to go to a career tech, well, he's not planning to go to a 4-year college but is planning to go to a career tech college, what is his motivation to do well on this test?
Well, schools are always, you could say that about it.
And the typical thought is that if he's going into career tech college, he doesn't need an ACT score to get in.
Yeah. Well, you could say that about many different tests. What is a student's motivation to do anything better than a D on a course test? A school is also, or a district is also free to put the ACT into their own grading policies if they want that kind of accountability for doing well at the local level. But we think in the end, good schools motivate kids to do well. And getting an 18 or above on the ACT keeps your options open one way or the other. If you do need to go into a technical or community program that does require the ACT, whether it's right then or whether it's down the line when you're a little bit older, it will not be an unhelpful thing to have had taken that test. We recognize there are students that, a small number of students who might not be motivated, although we think schools have a hand in that. We also recognize that not every student is headed to college, and you wouldn't even want that. It's a 2.5-hour test. We think that the price for sitting through a 2.5-hour test for that small number of kids who aren't necessarily headed to college is completely worth the benefits of rehinging our system's expectations around a college expectation.
Madam Chairman, I just want to ask one question following on that. The TOPS Tech Award has an ACT minimum requirement.
Yes.
Does it not?
Yes.
So a student who's planning, even if not immediate, who's planning on attending a technical or 2-year school, could actually benefit from scoring a 17 or above by basically earning a TOPS Tech Award. Is that correct?
That's right.
So why would those students not be why would they not have an incentive to do well on that test?
I don't. It's a good point. The TOPS creates a kind of incentive. I think there are some students for whom a TOPS award of any kind is not, necessarily in their future. I just am one to think, and our certain proposal reflects that we shouldn't take that option off the table for any child at any point.
How do they know? How do they know that that's not an option for them? Who takes it off the table?
Well, if a student, whether, and people will say that it's a parent who decides, and sometimes it is a parent who decides. Sometimes it's a counselor helping a parent to decide whether the student is 13 or whether the student is 15. At certain points, there is that decision to leave the basic or the Core 4 track and get into the career diploma track.
And
we just think that this should always be on the table.
And that's what I would say the value of the plan and explore test are, in that they don't leave that decision in the hands of just maybe someone at the school who has this predetermined idea that because of the student, the way they look, the way they act, or what their address is, that they're not college material. But in fact, as early as 9th grade, with taking these tests, they are given a range of what they can expect to earn on the explore test, and then or his explore plan, and then the ACT. So that is the value in having all three, the whole series of assessments, is that a student and family and child could see for themselves that they have the potential to do something perhaps some adults in a school don't think that they can.
And just to back that up, in Illinois, and by the way, there are 9 other states that already test roughly half the states in the country are ACT test states. 9 of those states fully test every student already. In those states that have moved toward every student being tested who doesn't have a severe impairment, the ACT average has gone up eventually. And in fact, in Illinois, more than 15% of students who reported that they wouldn't have gone to college took the ACT and then actually ended up going to college as a way of background.
Ms. Bradford?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
I would commend the department. This is a lot of quality work in a short period of time, and it's obviously it's moved pretty fast, and the locals are certainly looking in and trying to understand the new system that's coming, and looking forward to getting a system that's settled that we can stick with for a while. To probe that question a little bit further, and the dialogue so far has helped me understand a little better the reasoning behind it. I understand there are some federal requirements to have standardized tests. I'd like to understand that a little bit better. And I want to probe the Law 2 students and have some dialogue on that, of them taking the ACT and what influence that potentially has on the school performance scores. And what do you think? I mean, what has been the historical with that level of student taking this you expect the results to be? Because on the surface it would appear that there's not a lot, well, it's going to be interesting to see what the value is of that.
I think we would probably all agree that students who are severely impaired, whether they are currently Law 1 or whether they are currently classified as Law 2, if they are truly severely impaired, are probably not mentally impaired, are probably not well served by taking the ACT. And as it happens, there are some students who, because of Louisiana's interpretation of the what's called the 1% versus the 2% definitions, there are some students who have low incidence mental or cognitive disabilities that are Law 2, meaning that they essentially would take the standard assessment in a situation where the federal government has said that the Law 2 distinction needs to go away. So let's take that a step back. The reason the Law 2 distinction is going away is because of the federal government's desire to push for equity across states in terms of access to college preparatory and achievement type tests. We are in a small minority of states that have a Law 2. Most states do not categorize students as alternate assessment above the 1%. So the federal government has said that's going away. So if you do that, then the question is, well, what protections for what students are being lost? And I have to say, when you look at the data for Law 2, it's very uneven. We have one district that I believe 0.2% of their students are classified as Law 2. That's Lafourche Parish. We have other districts that are closer to 5% of students who are classified as Law 2. And in part, that's just because of the inconsistency of the standard, but in part it's because it covers such a wide range of students. I mean, quite literally, as anyone knows who has worked with these regulations, there are students who have traumatic brain injury that are part of this category, and there are students who have a reading disability who are part of this category. So we're talking about a very wide range of students. What we have said in light of the fact that this is going away is that we probably share with the board the idea that we would not want to test, for example, students who truly have a traumatic brain injury on the ACT, that we are working to redefine and will bring to the board how Law 1 actually is defined so that we have an appropriate set of students with low incidence cognitive disabilities in the Law 1 category, so that we truly are serving the right purpose, which is equity of access for all, never saying that just because a child is disabled, that means that child can't have access to college-level tests. But on the other hand, not making any very vulnerable students subject to an experience that is going to serve no one any good. We have no choice about the Law 2 question. It is going away by federal law. Thus, moving the Law 1 definition to be the right definition is our next charge. And that, I think, is the solution to, Mr. Grillo, the scenario that you've raised.
Other questions?
I have a question.
And then
I
Ms. Higbee, after
I
Mr.
don't know, is it my turn?
Yes, it's your turn.
All right,
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
In regard to the bonus points, how did we conclude, how I want to say this really, if you look on page, I guess it's 42, so for those that want to follow, item 4D1B, 4D1B. A minimum of 35% of the students in the non-proficient subgroup meet or exceed the expected growth as determined by the value-added model for students in grades K-8 as determined by the ACT series. All right, and then you follow down to item 3 under there, 4D3. Apparently, if they meet 4D1B, they can earn up to 10 bonus points. Is that correct? And I'm getting into the weeds just a little bit. I'm trying to make sure I understand.
That's correct. They can earn a maximum of that number of bonus points, yes.
Okay. And is that where is the 10 added? Is it added, again, I'm in the weeds a little bit, but I'm just trying to make sure. Is it added to the final score?
Yes.
Okay, so that's mathematically how it works.
Yes.
Okay. And how do we conclude that 35%, I know it's random, so I'm going to grant you that. Is that number significant enough to statistically to reward that bonus? I mean, apparently you believe that it is. I'd like to hear you articulate it. Now, I'm going to back up. Make sure I understand another concept before you answer. We've really gotten rid of some of what I call the soft components of the score, and you've structured this much more toward outcomes, which makes it a stronger score in general. I agree with that, and I want to make sure I'm following that properly. And so, if that's true, then I'm willing to look at the bonus, because prior to your term, we had this pretty significant debate on the issue of a bonus. But given that now it seems as if, again, we're going to more actual outcomes on relevant testing data, that a bonus could be, in effect, a good thing to incentivize schools to serve these kids. Explain to me, if it's possible, why this is the right percent. Is that a fair question?
If I say it's unfair, do I have to answer?
No.
The revised document was passed out a moment ago. It's actually going to be 30 now as opposed to 35.
It makes my question even more relevant.
Right. Please be sure you're referring to the revised document that was passed out.
I think as you allude to, all of these indexes are essentially questions of how do you create the right distribution of scores that motivates people to do specific things. So it's not, something, sort of some natural phenomenon. The 30% was changed from 35, number one, because the feds somewhat made us change our methodology, and that created some differences in the outcome. But essentially what we've done is to say that you get your SPS score as you would normally. At the same time, within schools that are, say, D schools, there's actually really significant difference. And there are D schools that are taking students who are coming to them all below basic, or almost all, and are moving them to a D level. Then there are students who are then there are schools that have kids who by all means should be at a B, or C, and they are ending up a D. So we think that in order to continue to create a certain situation where schools have incentives to take those kids, given that we've ratcheted up the accountability and the consequences in the system, scholarships, et cetera, we think that in order to create incentives for kids to come, you do want to give a real acknowledgement. And so there are several ways of doing that we do that in here. So the question is, to whom do you want to give that acknowledgement? And we started from the idea that let's first look at the distribution. And if you look at the distribution, what you see is that there is not surprisingly, a large middle of schools that basically are not really exceeding expectations with their low performers, with more than 20 or 25% of their low performers. There are a small number of schools that aren't moving anything more than 10% of their low performers. And then there's roughly 20 to 25% of schools that are at that 30% mark and above. And we looked at it then year over year, and what you see is that pretty consistently that set of schools is pretty similar year over year. That there are a set of schools that are, as you might call, the kind of elite in terms of moving low performers. Now, to be clear, some of those are A schools, some of those are F schools. Now, they're not going to be F schools for long, or maybe they're not even F schools this year, but they're every year they seem to be moving up. And so this was an attempt to say, okay, at what point do you cut it off and you say this is the percentage of kids required to be meeting or exceeding the target that would constitute you as kind of one of those elite schools, and 30% was the demarcating line. So then the question is, how do you award points in a way that's clear and in a way that's transparent? And we said you could do it actually quite simply. 0.1 SPS points for every percentage of child that exceeds their expectation. So if you get 30%, then you get 3 points, 3 SPS points. 40%, 4 SPS points. That has turned out to be a methodology that in our discussions with teachers, people can understand. It takes a little while, but people understand it. And second, it gives enough of a bump that it helps people's grades, but it doesn't inflate the core idea of what we have here, which is that a C still indicates something about your school, a D still indicates, a B still indicates something about your school. So it gives enough, whereas people feel like, okay, I see the light at the end of the tunnel, but not so much as to dilute the value of the letter grade. And thus we've landed in this place.
So, if I can follow up, so you're telling me the up to 10 points is based on the percentage that they move beyond the expected growth, correct? So
Is based on the percentage of kids who move beyond.
So is it literally 30% would be 3 points?
30% would be 3 points in math, then another 30% in ELA would be another 3 points.
Okay.
And what you couldn't top out as, let's say you had 50% of kids in math and 50% of kids in ELA. That would be the most that you could get. If a school had 75 points, for example, they could not exceed that.
Theoretically, you would hope that a school that is achieving that would eventually move a letter grade up anyway.
Well, that's what we're seeing, is that this is why I say it's the light at the end of the tunnel phenomenon. And just to put this in perspective, not to go back to the Big Apple, but in a previous school system where I worked, our system was 2/3 based progress. And I think it's fair to say that every year the accountability results felt a little bit like you didn't quite know what you were getting sometimes, because it's true that you had a progress-based measure of a low-performing school, so you could have a low-performing school that was an A or a B. Conversely, our current system is ratcheting up the consequences for low performance, but it's not really giving a light at the end of the tunnel for some of these schools. I mean, just to give you an example, Clark High School in New Orleans, which was taken over by one of our charter groups last year, that had an SPS of 20. It was a long way from 20 to 75. And that's only a D. So, a light at the end of the tunnel is a helpful thing to give morale boost, to continue to attract high-performing teachers, to sort of show that, you're going to get a faster rate of improvement toward that D if you just really put your pedal to the metal.
Is it possible for a school to receive the bonus but not achieve its overall school performance growth target? Does that make sense? It's a mathematical.
It is, I think, possible maybe, but very highly unlikely.
Could you identify yourself?
Yes, Jessica Bagian, or Tucker. The growth goals that existed previously, which were scaled against the 100% proficiency in 2014 and vary depending on where the school was, those are going away. And all we're saying to schools is that if you're an A, we'd like you to grow 5 points. I'll explain this in a second. A, 5 points, B through F, 10 points. And the only reason we're asking them to hit that mark is so that they can be labeled a reward school and hopefully get financial rewards and public recognition that they deserve. They could get to that 5 points as an A or 10 points as a B through F, either through overall SPS growth, through the bonus, or through some combination thereof. So it's not So they could get to the growth goal without the bonus could help them get there. They're sort of separate in that way.
But ostensibly, a school could, if their goal is 10, they could ostensibly get the ELA bonus of 3, but they only moved their low performers that year and didn't really move their higher performers, so they didn't hit their target of 10. I think that's unlikely. I don't know if we've run that report. Relatively unlikely, but possible.
Okay, I'm going to go to Ms. Beebe now. Mr. Bromer?
I've been cut off again.
Yes, you
This is
have.
so freaky.
We will let you have another turn
Thank you.
if we get to you. Ms. Beebe?
Excuse me, actually, I wanted clarification on the bonus point, which Superintendent White did an excellent job of clarifying that. And I'll yield to Ms. Bophy and then moving along.
Okay, thank
I
you,
don't
Ms.
know.
Beebe. Ms. Bophy?
So I appreciate that explanation, John. The question here is, and I think this is probably exactly what you've been talking about, is that what are we doing to make sure that our schools are not pushing kids out? Because unfortunately, when you create an accountability system, then people start looking at the accountability system and figuring out what they have to do to be successful with the system. And as much as I would like to believe that pushing kids out of school doesn't exist, it does. And so I think that it probably relates, that the answer will probably relate to what you just referred to, in the fact that when you have students with high needs, because those are the ones who ultimately are the ones that are pushed out, that the bonus would be an incentive to do that. And I appreciate any kind of thought that we could put around to making sure that our children are all given great opportunities to be successful in our schools.
Yeah, I mean, just to highlight a couple of things here. Number one, the fact that there's a middle school dropout component of this is significant, and most states don't have that. I think it's helpful. We have changed it so that it's not only a middle school dropout in the proposal, but it's actually a, do your students get to high school, and when they get to high school, do they accumulate credits in their 9th grade year, to provide an incentive for middle schools to not just make sure the kid gets to 9th grade, but to make sure that they actually get Carnegie units or in 8th grade or in 9th grade. Second, every dimension of our high school proposal is a cohort-based system, where if you are not in the cohort, there's a 0. So whether it's our testing elements or whether it's our graduation elements, by making the cohort graduation rate, for example, count on its own as part of the accountability system, you're strengthening the idea that a student who's not there, no matter where they went, is a 0 if they're still in the cohort. I think finally, other than that, it's just about tracking schools' retention. In New Orleans, for example, I'm really proud of the things that have been done around the enrollment process and so on. I do think that the board needs to pay close attention and perhaps revisit the question of alternative school accountability and continue to address that question, because I think that if it's about then students getting pushed to alternative schools irresponsibly, sometimes that's the right call, but if it's about doing it irresponsibly, there are ways of factoring the accountability in so that there isn't so much incentive to do that also, and I think we need to address that. That's not addressed in this proposal, but I would hope that we will have that discussion.
Ms. Hill?
Yes, I have a question, Superintendent White. I guess it's coming from my social worker hat now. I know you said that with the ACT component, that all the students will be required to take the ACT test, even those special education students, correct? So what are we doing to make sure, because as a social worker going to the schools, you have many students that have IEP plans, have 504, which they need accommodations due to their ability of academically, they're not quite there. So what are we doing to make sure that those students are going to be properly prepared to take a test like the ACT when they're already struggling trying to pass the LEAP or the iLEAP testing? And because the reason why I asked that question is because that score is going to be factored into that school overall score. And so if you have a school, let's just take, for example, a school in my district, I'm just going to hypothetically just say, if we take a school like Ostroma, we know the population that we're dealing with, versus a school like Woodlawn. So I'm just trying to make sure that what are we doing for those students who have those special education needs, especially mental health problems, because you have many students that are diagnosed with mental health issues that way beyond this scope of as far as education. So what are we going to do to assure that the schools are prepared for those students to make sure? That's my question.
Well, I'm not sure that there's anything that is any different from what we already would be doing with in terms of educating those students. I think, and for those who are coming to the event this evening, we'll talk a fair amount about our network support model, which I'm very excited about, where we actually will be working through with districts where are their achievement gaps and what are we doing in those schools and areas to prepare students for the Common Core. But I do want to stress that, without being too crass about it, the bus has somewhat left the station on the question of high standards, that the ACT is going to be no more difficult than our end-of-course assessments will be in English and in math and in social studies and science. So at the high school level, those standards are being adopted, those tests are being developed. There will be accommodations made for students on the ACT or on the end-of-course test who have specific disabilities, and I do think that's an important piece. If your IEP recommends it and it's applicable for the ACT or the EOCs, then you will receive modifications to make that test a more feasible test for you to take in the first place. But I don't think the ACT is particularly different from our end-of-course tests in terms of its level of rigor.
Mr. Garvey.
Yes, I apologize if you addressed this already. Please let me know. But aren't there extra points that the school can get for graduating fifth-year seniors?
There are. In our graduation index, we are weighting points for students who achieve a GED. Obviously not nearly what we would want, but we're weighting it. We are weighting a four-year graduation student. Above that, we are weighting a graduation for students who has attended and passed an end-of-course test, who has sat for an AP test, for dual enrollment, who has passed AP, or has achieved an industry-based certificate. And the highest level is for a four-year graduate who has passed an advanced placement or an IB test. But within that is points for a fifth-year grad. We know that students with IEPs and sometimes students who are just overage graduate in 5 years. We don't think that's optimal, but we think it's important to be rewarded. So 75 points is what a fifth-year graduate is awarded in this system, which is roughly the equivalent of a low C.
Ms. Bryant?
Yes.
Another area, just to discuss so to make sure I understand, and I'm certainly a proponent of advanced placement classes and going to the bonus points. We have 150 for AP classes. I think the dual enrollment is 110. And we've got some significant dual enrollment programs in the state right now. In fact, the policies of this board really encourage dual enrollment. I've heard some discussion around the difficulty of some of those classes, but at the same time, I'm aware of Ole Miss, LSU, University of Arkansas, Louisiana Tech, all accepting those credits from the current dual enrollment classes in the state. So where I'm headed is, how did you come about that it'd be 110 for a dual enrollment and 150 for an AP class? Why wouldn't that gap be closed some?
Sure. Well, again, the weights are indicative of essentially an attempt to honor where schools are performing now. So, in other words, if every student who passed a dual enrollment course graduated in 4 years and was awarded a 110 that is doing that today, schools would be where they are. So, in essence, the weighting 110 versus 150 is just a reflection of an attempt to adjust a new model to today's performance levels among students. But you're right that there's obviously a discrepancy in terms of the signal that we're sending to our schools when we weight advanced placement so highly. And first of all, unfortunately, the weighting of a 150 for the AP is probably more significant than the weighting of a 110 for dual enrollment, being high versus low, because so few students do pass an AP. Right now, 5.6% of our graduates, which is only 70%, so roughly 3% of our kids pass an AP. That makes us the last of 50 states in the country. And so on one hand, we know that that's not acceptable. That in part, in a small part, but in part explains why so few of our students persist through college, because you actually see that even students who took dual enrollment don't necessarily persist at a high rate. whereas students that have taken and mastered an advanced placement almost always persist through college. And so it is a fundamentally different thing. Now, I don't think it's different from all dual enrollment programs. I think there are probably some dual enrollment programs that are doing really tremendous work, and obviously I have visited Ruston in your district, Mr. Guillot, and have seen the work that goes on at Louisiana Tech. But I do think also, there is some very wide inconsistency. For example, in some schools, you can take the placement test, not pass the placement test, and still get credit for the course. In some courses, there are not placement tests. In some schools, the placement test consists of something that's much less rigorous from another school's placement test. And so what we have said to higher education in this model is that we will weight at 150, and we would urge the board to weight at 150, a student who has passed a test, the level of rigor and uniformity of which is equivalent to an AP. In other words, if Louisiana higher education develops an assessment that is equivalent to the level of rigor of the AP, by all means, we should absolutely award that. But right now, we shouldn't, or unfortunately can't, have faith that every dual enrollment course actually rises to that level. In fact, very few do. And in part, that's part of why when students go on to college, they're not necessarily really doing as well as they should.
Madam Chairman?
Yes, Ms. Dester.
I'd just like to note that we actually, the 150 is for attaining college credit kind of level, right? Success on the test, but actually for taking an AP course and actually, completing a course and actually taking the exam, sitting for the exam, and earning a 1 or 2, which may not be impressive to some, but is an accomplishment for many, is the school is awarded the same points as completing an industry-based certification. So it seems to me that is pretty well balanced. That we're not saying that AP is more valuable than IBCs. We're saying that extraordinary success on AP is worth more. Am I stating that properly?
Yes, and as it regards dual enrollment, if, for example, if a student takes, Bio 1 at a given Nichols or wherever it is, they could then take the AP Bio test, and if they pass the AP Bio test, then they would get credit here. They don't need to take an AP course. They just need to take and pass the AP test in order to get credit here. And, while I know that there's not perfect alignment between every AP course and every college course, it is, I think, a fair thing to say that there should be a standard level of rigor that the highest points are granted, and that's why we have said an AP test right now is really the only NEIB nationally valid college-level attainment assessment.
May I ask one more question? Do you see a day going forward, or a point going forward, where we could actually differentiate between IPCs and dual enrollment, and where there are some that perhaps would be more valuable to the student or to the marketplace or to their higher achievement goals within the IBCs? No, within the IBCs. Just like we're differentiating on an achievement basis amongst the APs.
Well, I think that as it regards the IBCs, and we've started doing some digging on this, I think it's probably fair to say that there are some that are more rigorous and some that are more valuable in the workplace than others.
Well, since would that be possible?
I think it is, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ms. Beebe?
Superintendent White, as I listen to the discussion and moving forward with the schools, you more or less predicted that they should continue to perform and not really take a hit from these policy changes. With regard to the GED, I noticed we moved from 90 to a score of 25 points for the GED. To me, that why are we reducing it to that number? It seems like a significant drop when we're talking about the
yes.
points.
Now remember, it's being scored on a different scale, so that's part of the reason for the drop. But even now, you're right that a 90 in the old scale relative to a 25 on the new scale is a significant drop. The number is designed so as to give schools some incentive once it looks like a student is not going to graduate to get the points, but not to compensate a school in a way that makes it at all desirable for a student to achieve only a GED. And it certainly in conversations with schools was our impression that a 90 on the old system out of 200 didn't provide sufficient kind of negative incentive to schools to send a student to a GED rather than to try to remediate them and graduate them. And we wanted to create more distance between the score for a graduate, which at 5 years would be 75, and a GED at 25. Those are significantly different things, and we think that a fifth-year grad should be rewarded much more heavily than a GED.
And I'd like to just respond to what Ms. Hill offered earlier regarding the special ed child or student. You know, as a teacher of special education some years ago, while I always supported or established high expectations, I also realized that I had to set realistic expectations. And this is going to create a paradigm shift for me, and I'm sure many educators throughout Louisiana. But at the end of the day, I hope you're correct in your assessment and that our schools will achieve the success. I just see with these policies, and for example, the ACT, in my research of 1.6 million students taking the ACT, only a fourth of those students met 4 benchmarks. So, I mean, are we establishing realistic expectations for success in our state?
Well, the nationwide average is roughly over 21.1. Our state as a whole is at 20.1, and our state, when you just look at the public school system, is at a 19.5. So at the same time, we've been making a rate of improvement on the ACT that would indicate that, you know, we're actually improving at a faster rate than the national averages. So by that count, you know, I think we should actually do quite well. Do I think that there's going to be a drop at the outset? There very well may be a drop at the outset. There are 25% of our kids currently that do not take the test. But I think 2 things will happen. Number one, I think we will discover that a small number of students, maybe even a fairly large number of students who, had they not taken the test, wouldn't have gone to college, will end up going to college. And second, that it will become part of the culture of our expectations in a way that lifts all boats. And that certainly has happened in Colorado. It certainly has happened in Illinois that have made similar shifts to this. And I would just finally say again that the Common Core is essentially already making this shift for us. The levels of literacy that are required and math on the ACT are beyond where we are now and really more in line with the Common Core.
Thank you.
Any other questions from BESE members?
I'd like to suggest a substitute motion in that we make a cleanup on page 80. And this is the old one. I don't know where it is on the new one because it's not numbered. But it's in chapter 23, section 2301.
What was the page number again?
Page number 80 on the old one.
80.
There's a discrepancy in dates about notifying the board as to when you're going to be closing or reconstituting a school. So based on my conversations with Ms. Tucker, that if we were to strike out the section that says by December 31st of the previous academic year, then we won't have that conflict anymore.
May I just clarify here?
Please.
I apologize for this error. It's my fault. In getting rid of yet another set of plans, which, by the way, we should just call out the long, somewhat scary list of plans that are now being deleted from this bulletin, I copied the date from below into that, and it's an error. What this meant previously was that if a district was planning to close a school, they told us around December, hey, we're thinking about doing this, we're putting together a plan for how it will work. We're not requiring those plans anymore. Of course, we hope that they're doing this with a lot of thought and previous planning, but we don't need that plan, thus we don't need a date, and they can actually tell us toward the end of the year when they've actually actualized on that plan. So.
Is that in the amended, or is it still
No, but we can
incorrect
make
in
that
the
without
amended?
having a substitute motion.
Okay.
We can make that.
We can
motion.
just
Okay.
amend that without
Oh,
doing
thank you.
because this is amendment.
Can there be other minor corrections like that, grammatical, without us making a motion to that effect?
Yes, because this is an amended.
I'll come bring it to you. Really, it's a typo, it's not. I want to make sure it's not a grammatical error, it's a typo.
Okay.
Makes me cringe a little bit because I cannot tell you how many
We're
times
going
we've
to
read this
correct the
document.
typo wherever it is. So, we have, yes. We have a card from Rain Martin, Stand for Children.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rain Martin. I'm the Executive Director of Stand for Children. And I thought if I came up here and spoke in this capacity as opposed to working at the department, maybe Mr. Lee would not grill me as much as he typically did when I worked at the department. And he's on the phone, so it's perfect timing. We're here actually in support of this particular changes to Bulletin 111. Stand for Children's mission is that every single child, regardless of their background, their income, their racial background, has access to a great education. And we find that these changes in this accountability system really supports that belief system. We've been engaging with parents around the state, and we find that parents have really high expectations for their kids, and they actually have been expressing that they wish the system itself had higher expectations. We think there are three things in particular that really make this strong and that we think are going to really actually mobilize better academic outcomes for kids. One is the changes to the point system itself. It's much clearer. It's easier for parents to understand how a 100-point system with bonus points can match up to letter grades, and that's really important for parents who want to truly understand how their schools are doing and also get engaged around changes that they'd like to see in those schools that they don't think are truly servicing their kids as well as they should be. There's also a lot of things in here around higher expectations. The ACT provision we think is really important. We're also excited that there's no longer points given for kids that are below basic in this new system. I think Louisiana is a good test case for how raising expectations can raise academic achievement. Since 1999, for instance, the school performance score itself has raised about 40 points, and we think that's in large measure due to the fact that there is an accountability system where the increase in expectations have played out more and more over time. Also, it's also achieved a lot in terms of more closing an achievement gap, which we also think is really important. There's still a large number of kids right now who are in certain communities that are behind. We know that the changes in the accountability system previously has decreased that, and we think that these changes are also going to do that. In particular around the incentive and bonus points. We think that's a really creative use of the accountability system. There's a number of kids now who consistently stay behind, and the system is not truly really incentivized or rewarded for working with those kids, and we're really excited that those are in here. You know, I've been with Stand for Children now for 5.5 months. We're fairly new in Louisiana, although they've been in existence in the country for 20 years. And we've had a lot of times to engage with parents. And one of the things that I would say has been referenced most often by parents is the fact that they didn't realize the education they were receiving in their school until they went to college. I've heard that at least 3 times, and even as recently as this past Saturday, we had a kickoff event in our Baton Rouge chapter. We had parent leaders who actually came and spoke, and Mr. Brazier himself said, it really wasn't until I got to college that I realized I wasn't getting the education I needed in the K-12 system. So we really hear that a lot. We know that parents, again, have high expectations for their own kids, and we're seeing and we believe when they tell us that they want the system to also have those same high expectations. So we're here to support that. We weren't able to bring any parents with us today because many of them are either sort of detoxing after the kickoff we had this weekend or at work. But we do have some parents who are out there who are really in support of this, and we hope that you'll be able to see some of their faces and hear from them soon. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? If not, any opposition to the revised edition of this motion? So moved. I think we have a motion. Any opposition? Motion passes. Next item.
Next item is item 7.6 on page 101. Consideration of revisions to Bulletin 741, Louisiana Handbook for School Administrators, Section 2324, Credit Recovery. Department recommendation is to approve as notice of intent.
We need a motion on this item.
I'll move approval.
Thank you, Mr. Romer, second by Mrs. Hill. Any discussions or questions? Any comments? Hearing none, any opposition? Motion carries. Next item.
Next item is 7.7 on page 103. Consideration of repealing Bulletin 1196, Louisiana Food and Nutrition Programs, Policies of Operation, and revising Bulletin 741, Louisiana Handbook for School Administrators, Section 2103, School Food Service. Department recommendation is to approve as notice of intent.
So moved.
Thank you, Ms. Dastig. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Buffy. Any comments or questions? Ms. Dastig?
I'd just like to note that I challenged Jessica to, for every new bulletin that she brings before the board, that she brings us the repeal of an existing bulletin.
She might be
So she owes us
behind.
one more.
I was going to say
Two
she's
more.
behind then. Any other questions or comments?
She did cut one in half, so we'll give her
Okay.
half credit.
All right. Any questions or comments? Hearing none, any opposition to the motion? Motion carries. Next item.
Next item is item 7.8, page 105. Consideration of the creation of Bulletin 132, Louisiana Course Choice Program. Department recommendation is to approve as notice of intent.
We need a motion on this item.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Ms. Buffy. We need a second. Thank you, Mr. Keough. Questions or comments?
And this is the bulletin that describes the process that was alluded to before when we were talking about the RFA.
Thank you for that clarification. Questions or comments?
Well, I just wanted to address page 109, item D, regarding the course choice program for the providers. Would this be course providers like outside of the public setting?
Ms. Vicky, let me interrupt you 1 second. You're getting an amended copy right now, so let's be sure we're looking at that one because that's the one we'll be voting on. Superintendent.
No, it can be providers within the public system as well.
But if there are outside entities, my question is, they would then indeed be responsible for the special education
Yes,
services?
yes.
That was my question.
Thank you, Ms. Buffy. Maybe other questions or comments? Hearing none, any opposition? Motion carries. Next item.
That concludes the agenda.
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I'd like to make that motion.
I thought we were going to sit here with that one. Thank you. Ms. Hill, you're second. Thank you. We are adjourned.